It is this liberal acceptation of the false for the true, and this ready recognition of fables as authentic narratives, whereby imaginative writers have been encouraged to plunge into the realms of absurdity instead of confining themselves to the domain of legitimate history, that have cast an air of romance over all that has hitherto been written about Freemasonry. Unjustly, but very naturally, scholars have been inclined to reject all our legends in every part as fabulous, because they found in some the elements of fiction. But on the other hand, the absurdities of legend makers and the credulity of legend readers have, by a healthy reaction, given rise to a school of iconoclasts, to whom there will soon be occasion to refer, which sprang up from a laudable desire to conform principles of criticism which are to govern all investigations into Masonic history to the rules which control profane writers in the examination of the history of nations. As examples of the legends of Masonry which have tempted the credulity of many and excited the skepticism of others, those almost universally accepted legends may be cited which attribute the organization of Freemasonry in its present form to the era of King Solomon's Temple, the story of Prince Edwin and the Grand Lodge, congregated by him at the city of York in the 10th century, and the theory that the three symbolic degrees were instituted as Masonic grades at a period very long anterior to the beginning of the 18th century. These statements, still believed in by all Masons who have not made the history of the order an especial study, were until recently received by prominent scholars as veracious narratives. Even Dr. Oliver, one of the most learned as well as the most prolific of Masonic authors, has, in his numerous works, recognized them as historic truths without a word of protest or sign of doubt, except, perhaps, with reference to the third legend above mentioned, of which he says, with a cautious qualification, that he has some doubts whether the master's degree, as now given, can be traced 3 centuries backwards. Footnote: Dissertation on the state of Masonry in the 18th century. But now comes a new school of Masonic students, to whom, borrowing a word formerly used in the history of religious strifes, has been given the name of iconoclasts. The word is a good one. The old iconoclasts, or image breakers of the 8th century, demolished the images and defaced the pictures which they found in the churches, induced by erroneous but conscientious views, because they thought that the people were mistaking the shadow for the substance and were worshiping the image or the picture instead of the divine being whom it represented. And so these Masonic iconoclasts, with better views, are proceeding to destroy, by hard, incisive criticism, the intellectual images which the old, unlettered Masons had constructed for their veneration. They are pulling to pieces the myths and legends whose fallacies and absurdities had so long cast a cloud upon what ought to be the clear sky of Masonic history. But they have tempered their zeal with a knowledge and a moderation that were unknown to the iconoclasts of religion. These shattered the images and scattered the fragments to the four winds of heaven, where they burnt the picture so that not even a remnant the canvas was left. Whatever there was of beauty in the work of the sculptor or painter was forever destroyed. Every sentiment of aesthetic art was overcome by the virulence of religious fanaticism. Had the destructive labors of these iconoclasts been universal and long continued, no foundation would have been left for building that science of Christian symbolism, which in this day has been so interesting and so instructive to the archaeologist. Footnote. Thus, the Emperor Leo the Isaurian caused all images and pictures to be removed from the churches and publicly burnt, an act of vandalism not surpassed by that Saracen despot, who, if the story be true, ruthlessly committed the books of the Alexandrian library to the flames as fuel for the public baths. Not so have the Masonic iconoclasts performed their task of critical reformation. They have shattered nothing. They have destroyed nothing. When in the course of their investigations into true Masonic history, they encounter a myth or a legend replete, apparently, with absurdities or contradictions, they do not consign it to oblivion as something unworthy of consideration. They dissect it into various parts. They analyze it with critical acumen. They separate the chaff from the wheat. They accept the portion that is confirmed by other and collateral testimony as a legitimate contribution to history. What is undoubtedly fictitious they receive as a myth and either reject it altogether as an unmeaning addition to a legend or give it an interpretation as the expression of some symbolic idea which is itself of value in a historical point of view. That lamented archaeologist, Mr. George Smith, late of the British Museum, in speaking of the cuneiform inscriptions excavated in Mesopotamia and the legends which they have preserved of the old Babylonian Empire, said, footnote, Chaldean Account of Genesis, page 302. With regard to the supernatural element introduced into the story, it is similar in nature to many such additions to historical narratives, especially in the East. But I would not reject those events which may have happened, because in order to illustrate a current belief or add to the romance of the story, the writer has introduced the supernatural. It is on this very principle that the iconoclastic Masonic writers, such as Hugon and Woodford, are pursuing their researches into the early history of Freemasonry. They do not reject those events related in the old legends, which have certainly happened, because in them they find also mythical narratives. They do not yield to the tendency which George Smith says is now too general to repudiate the earlier part of history, because of its evident inaccuracies and the marvelous element generally combined with it. Footnote. Ibidium. It is in this way, and in this way only, that early Masonic history can be rightly written, made up, as it has been for centuries past, of a commingled tissue of historical narrative and legendary invention. It has been heretofore read without judicious discrimination. Either the traditional account has been wholly accepted as historical, or it has been wholly rejected as fabulous, and thus, in either case, numerous errors have been the consequence. As an example of the error which inevitably results from pursuing either of these methods of interpretation, one of which may be distinguished as the school of gross credulity, and the other as that of great skepticism, let us take the legend of the temple origin of Masonry. That is to say, the legend which places the organization of the institution at the time of the building of the temple at Jerusalem.